Alrighty, thanks everybody for coming. This is going to be the guide for medical device startups. Basically, product development best practices. So if you're not looking for that, you're in the wrong room. So you have myself, Tor Alden, principal of HS Design, as well as Bobby Boyer.
Boyer.
Close. You say Boyer. But so we're both from HS Design, and we both work on a lot of medical startups. And Bobby actually has an MBA. I have a Master's of Technology Management. So together we're pretty dangerous as far as understanding what startups are coming to us with, and what we do from basically our objective from I guess our value prop is that we don't want to just take money from people and just have them disappointed. So we're even more and more cautious when we get doctors or entrepreneurs that are their first time at the startup. So we want to really sort of scare you a little bit about what's going to happen along the way, because it is a long way and a long process. And what we do with our when we do bring on clients, we want to make sure that we identify what kind of startup you are. And you know, just from a perspective of different startups, there's everybody from a person that has a great idea for that is a caregiver and they have a great idea for a new stool, all the way up to a Fortune 100 company that has a new incubator or a new business they just bought and they just invested $100 million. So the value and the difference of what they're looking for and the speed to market changes. And so we're going to try and identify that a little bit. HS Design, we're basically we're solely a medical and life science product development firm. We're celebrating our 40th year this year, actually in April, and along the way we've sort of managed to probably design everything from head to toe. Worked with a lot of different startups, and we pride ourselves that over the past 10 years we've won 15 awards, both IDEA and MDEA. We actually won a gold at IDEA just this year with Steve Zantiris. So we pride ourselves on that. We try to meet the user needs. We're also highly collaborative, so when it comes down to working with an individual or a company, we will be the first one to tell you we don't know what we don't know. So we'll reach out to our network, whether it be a software or whether it be optics engineering or any other types of discipline, maybe it's regulatory. We'll partner you with the right size person, so you're not overwhelmed with a 100-person regulatory firm if you're an individual startup. So we'll kind of work with you flexibly that way.
Even with manufacturing too, when we get to scale, some manufacturers only look at a product that does $5 million a year. We try to partner with the smaller firms that have the smaller quantity volumes so we can get your product out quickly and efficiently as well.
And that's a great point Bobby made, is that the manufacturer, a lot of people will say, well, we want to go to this one-stop shop because they have factories in China or they're looking huge volumes. But the reality of a startup is that you're probably, you're going to start off in a minimal viable product, you're going to go into an alpha, you're going to go into a beta. By the time you reach that volume that you initially thought of, you probably have pivoted 3 times and your product's slightly different than you did the first time. So it's a conversation you should have with us. The other part of it is standards are in our DNA. We've been 1345 probably for over 15 years now. We just went through our 2016 audit last month. Very painful, don't recommend it. But again, with that, it's the understanding of how we adapt our quality process to make it more efficient for you as well as us. So we believe that being 1345 really gives us a competitive advantage. The other part of the value chain that we offer is that we're part of AMI. That's the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation. We have 2 people on the board for Human Factors Engineering. Mary Beth, who's somewhere in the back, is actually the co-chair for that. And so we're up to date on 32666 and HE75 and all those good human factors. So now to you guys. We want to basically tailor this and make it a little bit more interactive for you to sort of get what you want out of this. So we want to kind of just understand, raise a hands, who here is a startup?
Kind of startup? Kind of. Okay.
Who here is a serial entrepreneur? All right, got a couple. You may want to come up here and talk for us. And then who here is a doctor with a good idea? Oh, we'll get a couple of those.
No doctors in the house.
So who here understands or is knows the lean startup methodology. All right, a couple. All right, so, all right, good. I think we got a
Fun ride for everyone.
Anybody here use Scrum? Any agile methodologies? Okay. All right, great. I think you're all in the right room. So basically, you know, what fascinates us, and it's really remarkable that, you know, in the day right now you've got augmented reality, you've got personalized vaccines, you have all this push for, you know, just the caregivers getting more of their contact on smartphones and iOSs. There's so many opportunities for startups. It's just phenomenal for us why 3 out of 4 fail. And we don't think they're stupid. We don't think that they're misguided or just bad luck. So what is it? There's got to be more to it. And again, this fact is from Harvard Business School. There are other facts that say it's 72%, but there's just an overwhelming amount of evidence that says that a startup will fail, and medical much faster.
So why do startups fail? What are some of their mistakes? So first thing is they don't do any market research. So something that we've noticed a lot is you have a great invention, that's your invention. Don't ask any customers about anything, just my thought is the best thought and move forward. Then they don't understand the IP landscape. They don't understand that their idea, if they're going for a patent, needs to be protected. Something a lot of people would say is the paranoid survive. And that's something that happens a lot with IP protection is, you know, you have to keep that kind of close to your heart, close to your chest. And some inventors come in and they'll just start telling the world about their new idea, and it's not yet patented, but everyone's got to hear about it because it's so cool. They don't use any regulatory assistance. So this is very much so in medical device. So they don't look at the FDA landscape at all. They just assume that either they need the FDA or they don't need it, and then that's it. So that's a big challenge. They don't plan, this is kind of going back to the first one, they don't plan any usability studies. They don't try to figure out, you know, what is the pain point to the user? Why would my great idea not work? The great idea always works. And
can I add a little bit more to that?
Sure.
So voice of customer, everybody sort of probably heard that word before, but it's basically, you know, market research. Then you talk about usability studies and you're talking about user. We value those as two different activities. The market is really, you're going to do your business canvas, which we'll get to in this workshop, and you'll kind of understand where that falls into it. But the actual part that we do, and we feel we can do it within the FDA guidance and make it a quicker pathway for you, is to really understand the users and the user needs and identify how many users you have within a certain product. And again, when we back up a little bit more about how complex problems in the medical field arise, because there's startups and you know, let's say you introduce an augmented reality in a surgical suite, everything else changes around it, and all the people that are used to doing one thing in a protocol or another they really have to see value. And that's the message we're going to come back with today and again and again and again, is that value to the user is critical, and it comes with understanding your market, bringing it to us, and then we helping you with the users and understand the usable plans, working with regulatory and all that good stuff. Right?
And then lastly, timeline and costs. So something a lot of people don't know is, especially in the medical field, it takes time to do it right. But that doesn't mean that there's no portions of it that can be accelerated. Even through the FDA process, there's ways to accelerate certain processes and move faster through the FDA regulatory landscape.
It's sort of like a Jacob's ladder, if you're familiar with that, but you basically, you want to stagger your funds to the point where you can't roll back the hill, right? So if you know you have friends and family money, or if you've got your own money to invest in, and again, that's key. If you're a startup on your own and you're afraid to invest your own money, who else is going to invest in it? So there is that sort of pain that you have to give to show other people that you really believe in it. They're looking for leaders. But get to that point where once you get to that point you need more funding, you don't roll back to the beginning.
That gets to kind of the pitfalls here, so when a typical startup comes in, they'll have, again, an idea, then they'll jump into getting an IP, getting patents to whatever they can, then they'll try to get funding, either friends and family, or they'll go through a small grant. then the first thing they'll do is develop their idea exactly the way they had it thought of, exactly as their patent is. They'll try to create a prototype, and then they'll go to the investors and try to pitch. And this is where you get a lot of investor pitches which will say, oh, this looks great, but come back to me in a few months once you've worked this out. Or, I love the idea, it's not right for me yet. And that's when they're trying to say, you know, have you validated this through anyone before that, or is it just your idea? And so they'll take the feedback from the investors, and this is where they'll pivot. They'll say, okay, the investor told me he didn't like this portion of it, so let me change that. And now they change it, go back to develop it, prototype it, go to another investor, and they'll say, well, I like this, but what if it had Bluetooth instead of Wi-Fi? Well, now let's pivot. Let's add that Bluetooth feature in. And they don't really understand who their end customer is going to be and why that feature needs to be there. It's just somebody told them this was a good idea, so they just went about it. And they just keep going until eventually they don't have any more
It's like
funds.
a dog chasing its own tail. And what Bobby brought up, and I should have mentioned, he also teaches at Rutgers CTEC. And so you've probably seen a lot of these pitches. But the amazing part of it, people are so hungry for investors that they will actually give up their idea and just hear what the investor tells them they want. And they go back, and the investor, that's the last thing they want to hear from somebody looking for money, that they're that easy to change. So it's sort of almost a negative happening, where all of a sudden they just, you know, if anything, convince the investor why you're doing it this way, as opposed to saying, oh, I need to go Bluetooth. So,
Right. Which kind of gets into this beautiful graphic we have here, which is essentially the IP doesn't fit the user needs. And so you're trying to fit this square peg into this round hole. And that's what ends up happening even after, if there is successful funding, then the company will bring it out to market. And if it flops, it's, well, I don't understand, this is the best product we've had. Well, the reason is because they never looked at their users' needs and never looked at what the pain points were when they came up with this. And they thought their idea is the best idea that ever existed. And that kind of gets along with...
Well, go back 1 second. I just want to, you know, we're not going to really hit IP too much in this because we're not IP lawyers. We have people that we can point you to if you need that. But there are certain things that happen along the way from a process that you have to be aware of as a startup. You know, you start off with basically you have this freedom to operate mentality where somebody's going to tell you, well, can I get in this space? The next thing you're going to do is write a provisional patent, which basically locks in all your claims that you believe are right away at the beginning before you have any funding, before you even talk to anybody. Then you're going to basically either decide to go design or utility patent or both, and then you get to decide whether it's going to be international or just US. And then you're going to have to decide, well, maybe it's a trademark or maybe it's a patent. By the time that's all over, your mind is locked into that IP. Is that it? That is it. I mean, unless you have a really phenomenal IP lawyer that will broaden claims, that will give you free carte blanche on certain aspects, you are kind of pigeonholed into a certain area. And so that's what we call the tech push, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But that tech push is really going to force you to sort of want to go into an area that maybe users don't want. So the next slide. So this is a great TED Talk. Really encourage you guys to listen to. It's Tim Harper, Trial and Error in the God Complex. And basically what he's getting after is this idea that, and he talks about a guy named Andy Cochran, who has he was a doctor and a phenomenal theory that he came up with, which is called the God Complex. And we said there were no doctors in the room, right? So the God Complex is really that the more educated you are and the more inevitably you have blinders put onto your vision, and you believe that certain things are a certain way. And the quote is great. It's no matter how complicated the problem, you have an absolutely overwhelming belief that you're infallibly right in your solution. And you have to keep in mind that startups have that same mentality. It's based on the patent, it's based on the short funding that they have, and everything. And it's a complex system. You're dealing with something that's so overwhelming that it's so easy to basically put yourself into a trap and say, you know, this is what I confirm my belief that this is the way to go. And so the challenge with this is that to be a really good startup or a serial entrepreneur, you have to have extremely strong leadership. You have to have a really strong vision. And that's similar to a doctor's training and that mentality. So inevitably you become that you fall into that problem. And so what we really want to make sure that you understand is that you need to step back from the problem. You need to be aware that no matter what channel or where you go down, there's always another route you could go. And I think that there's a real good challenge, and it backs up sort of the FDA's position. It backs up a lot of the ISO 1345 training. Is that, you know, and I'll give you an example. We a few years ago, many years ago, probably about 10, was presenting our concepts in front of the CEO, and the CEO came up to all three of them, looks at it very carefully, and just asked, "How did we get here?" And you know, everybody's just like, "How do you have to pick that?" So all of a sudden, it's just a real eye-opener to make sure that, you know, all these decisions everybody's making, you're on a project schedule, you have to make timelines. Those simple decisions that you make are going down a track that you're eventually going to be stuck down one pathway. And you really need to make sure that you're testing. And I guess, you know, back to the TED Talk was that he really believed, maybe go back real quick, we're going to have to do that animation, but Tim really believed that it's all about evolution, trial and error. And he actually gave a great example, and it came from Unilever, where they had to do a jet spray for a detergent nozzle, and no engineer could figure out how to do the right nozzle. So, long story short, they decided to basically prototype 10 nozzles, unique different shapes, see which one worked better. Take that one, make 10 different variations of that one, see which one worked better. Then take 10 others, and so forth, so on, until they actually got one that worked perfectly. To this day, they don't know really why or how it works, but it works. And so the premise that he comes up to is that product development falls into that evolutionary trap where you need to try, fail, and eventually you'll evolve yourself into a product that fits the market. So, again, Michigan.
Well, one other point to make to this is we've talked a little bit earlier about IP and how, you know, inventors have their mindset that their IP is the greatest thing. That gives you some protection to give you an advantage, a competitive advantage. But there's also the issue that even if you have your IP and everything's great, that doesn't mean that someone else can't come out with an idea that's very similar to yours and that can actually bypass that patent. So you still have to be slightly paranoid with your IP until you go through the process. And then it comes to our beautiful minimizing the pitfalls. So this is kind of what we tell startups to look for and to add in their process to make it easier and to get to the point where they're more successful. So the orange areas are highlighted there, but once you have the IP and you have an idea of what your technology is, then it's really what is your value proposition, which is something we've talked a little bit about, but value proposition is what kind of need are you fulfilling with your technology. And you need to identify that, to identify what the users are, and then you need to go and test it out. So before you even get to a prototype, calling people, finding out, you know, this voice of the customer of, do people actually want it? Before I spend all my time, energy, and money, do people actually want it? So it's a lot of calling, finding out what they like, what they don't like. And then from there, that's when you get to a little bit more of the contextual inquiry aspect that we've talked about earlier, where you start to create your prototype, or you start to create your idea, and then you bring it in front of people, and you try to understand the landscape and understand where is this going and how is it going to fit into this particular need. And this is where we also have the regulatory aspect. And getting, especially in medical devices, understanding what classification is your device. What does that mean? I mean, different classes, class 1, 2, or 3, could mean various different paths for your device. Could mean various different funding strategies. So, you know, what does that mean? And then you start really going into more of the development aspect, and you create these MVPs, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but MVP is really just what is your minimal viable product to prove out the main need of your device and get the actual end user's feedback Tor wants to say something.
Well, so I think what we should do is, we can't do it because all the animation will go through, but if you compare the old one, basically the black type versus the orange, you'll see that there's a shorter path with the black. And so obviously if I have need to be in production in a year and I want to only have a certain amount of funding, that's the path I want to go down. If I see a longer path and I say, well, I need to now do contextual inquiry, which, does everybody here know what contextual inquiry is? Yeah. So basically, a step back is once you find out and understand what your idea is, you have to prove it in the environment and understand who the real users are. And it's really just sort of ethnographic research within the domain of the product landscape. So through all this process, it's a longer lead time. It's a more rigorous haul, but you'll see that there are two main pivots, and those pivots save you time and money in the end, because the likelihood you get to the right goal with just going that further one, you have 3 to 4 chances of failing. So really the take home here, the value proposition, it is critical it's critical for the user, and it's critical for the product success. If the users don't want it, they're going to fight it, and we'll have different examples that will show how people will kill an idea, and you may think it's for the one person and another person step in. So it's really just making sure that you have a deep understanding of what you're trying to solve. So again, simple definition of a value proposition, it's what gains are you giving that person, or what pains are you alleviating from that person. And so when you think about your product, what is it that you're actually giving that person that they're going to say, hey, this is amazing, I can now take a picture with my phone, it's a fantastic value prop. But what are the pains that it's going to be? My battery life is 2 hours. So you have to think about all that through there.
And the value prop really helps not just for the product, but also as a business, creating a business around your product. And that's something we'll touch upon later, but there's a product and then there's a business. And when you're going to be invested in, it really needs to be a business, a long-term haul, not just selling one specific product. So this really bridges the gap between the user needs, your business, and your competitive advantage.
So yeah, all these questions that are here are things that you should be asking yourself, and then going out to the market and actually asking them. So who are your customers? Who are the users? What are their needs? This is really important, and the NIH has actually felt it's so important that they've included in their curriculum. We can go to the next page. The business model canvas is basically a book that we recommend you buy. It's by Alexander Osterwalder. He wrote several papers on it. He preaches this throughout his career. But basically, instead of a business plan that's pretty complex, and for a startup, you don't really need to do a complex business plan. He's created this business model canvas. And it goes through everything from identifying your customers, identifying sales channels, your key partners, all the way through to basically finding what your real fit is between the customer and the product. And so, again, we're not going to go in detail on all of these parts of it. We're really going to focus on what we value, the most important part of it for us, and that's really to match that need of the product to the user. And if you do that well, you're going to succeed. The challenge is, in some cases, to do that well, you're going to have to go through, as Bobby mentioned, those minimal viable products, or the MVPs. You're going to have to go through a lot of them, because this whole design is basically to test for you to fail often. And if you think about the other slide that said 3 out of 4 fail, if you can fail 3 out of 4 times in your own product before you launch, your odds of succeeding are higher because you've already tested your model and failing, right? So the goal here is really to, the first time you have that idea, the first time you have that IP in a provisional, is build something up crude as it could be, call up the people that you think that product is for, tell them about it, ask them, and if you get a lot of silence on the end of the line, or you get a lot of questions, you still have to have that. That's the pure leadership ability to not just pivot right away because somebody said they wanted a different feature, is to really just understand where they're coming from. And again, this chart is phenomenal to me. I think it's a great chart. It's really just talking about, think about where are your pains and where are your gains, and what's your product offering for those. And in between there is that product fit. And when you get that, you'll know it. And then then the investors will be coming in, and then it's really sort of the beginning of the good journey. And with that, I think what we did is we wanted to make it a little bit more interactive. So Bobby and I collectively have probably worked on 4 projects that deal with RFOs, which are retained foreign objects. Most common are surgical sponges that are left in ORs. And so let's say that you have this great idea for an RFID tag that you can put inside a sponge or into a medical device to track that product throughout its history. What we're going to basically ask you, and I think we gave you pieces of papers. Do we have enough?
I think some more up there.
So if anyone needs any, we want to give you a couple minutes, just kind of go through this, and we're going to basically ask you to fill that out to basically understand what a value prop is for this product. So to give you a little bit more background, an RFO, like I said, was basically a surgical instrument that's left in after surgery, and it happens more frequently than you think. It happens in trauma cases, and if you've ever seen surgery, that nice white sponge, when it goes inside the abdominal wall, turns red, just like a tissue sample, and it becomes very, very hard to track. They do have, magnetic features, so we can X-ray them. They've done their best to basically find them if they can, but there's a whole process around there. So in an operation, you have surgical nurses, circulating nurses, and they have a job of counting in and counting out the sponges, and they do it so accurately that Bobby would count 1, I would count 1, and we both equal 10. We nod our head, and that would be in the sterile field. And now the doctor would perform the surgery. Afterwards, they would count them out, and they have a bucket where they would count them out, or a rack where they would count them out. And it's a very tedious problem. And now when you think about the whole optimization of a hospital, time in is money. If somebody's trying to find where that last sponge is, they're going to be hard pressed and pressured. And there's actually really good facts to say that there's that there's a lot of the correct counts are wrong. So we counted out 10, or we counted out in 10, we're good. That count could be wrong.
And by the time that count is finalized and checked, the patient is sutured up, is gone, and now they find out, oh, there's an extra sponge that's missing. Where do we go? So they have to find out if it's in that person's body. And sometimes patients will come back to the hospital and say, oh, I've got this cramp and I don't know where it is. And they'll do an x-ray and say, oh, wow, there's a pair of scissors in here. Forgot about that.
So there's a cost to the hospital, there's a cost to the nurses, there's all these things that are happening. It's a complex problem. Everything goes easy, and then the trauma happens, everything happens, everybody's raising their voices. This is a typical surgical suite, just to get kind of a lay of the land. There's a lot of instrumentation. So the question is, and exercise 1 is what would your value proposition, or what would you look at for pains and gains for the value prop? I'm going to leave this up.
Yeah, we'll give you 5 minutes, 4 minutes.
Anybody courageous enough to give a value prop?
No, I'm not courageous enough to give a value prop. First, I'd like to understand who we need to identify the customer. So
Right.
we need to identify who the value proposition is for. So is it for the investors? Is it for the clinician? Is it for the purchasing board at a hospital? Who are we?
Absolutely.
Designing the value proposition.
That's a very good point.
Absolutely. And that's the reason we're bringing up this case, and this is why it seems like an obvious problem to solve, but very few companies have solved it 100%. So who is the customer? I mean, we can dive right in there, right? I mean,
yeah, so you jumped ahead to the right way to do things. We're going to see if people are using the wrong way.
But, I mean, for the sake of this example, you're absolutely right. In this case, we decided that the value proposition was for the hospital to reduce costs. Because if they can reduce this lawsuits for the patients, if they can increase the throughput of the patients going from the OR out to step down, and if you can free up that OR, if you can create an inventory management system to know that I put 10 sponges in this patient, and I got, the average week is 100, and so now I know that I can order 100 a week. That whole logistics just in time, and just improve quality for patients, where the patients will say, hey, I went to this hospital where it has this value add, and that's why I feel comfortable going here, so they get more income. That's one value proposition. There are 100 out there probably. We believe this is a pretty strong one. It could be, tested, right? So now we're basically onto this slide 2, right? So now that you have that value proposition that the hospital is, that's their value prop, they want to reduce the cost for a hospital. Who are the users? Who are the customers for this? To your question.
Is it rhetorical, or do you want to answer?
If you want, it would be great if you could answer.
The users in this would probably would be the nurses and the surgeons.
Okay. I guess we can slip right to the next slide.
Yeah.
So, how many people said the nurses? Right? How many people said this, the surgeons? How many people said the patient? You're all right. All these people are your customers. And this is what the challenge was really invented and designed for, is that now you basically have to spend this much effort on each one of those patient or each one of those customers to make sure that the value to that product meets their needs. So some are going to be more direct. So for example, let's say the hospital finds your value that your system is only $100,000 for the whole hospital. That's a huge value proposition for the hospital. But let's say the nurses really don't like that system, and it causes them more pain in implementing that system. Do you think that system's going to survive in that hospital? Chances are no, because the nurses will kill it. And basically the message is that if you find one of those customer segments that you don't think is important or you haven't really vetted out, be sure enough that they're going to come after you and basically make your life miserable because you're adding more pain to them. And in the nurses' cases, they have enough to do. There's a change of protocol. If now I've got this new system in and I have to scan, but I can't really lose my count. I still have to count manually because that's the protocol of the hospital, so I can't just forget that process. So now I have to add another process to this, and this is just so the hospital has the high perceived value of having a sponge counting system. That may not be a winning value prop.
And so that's why when you get to the stage when you're creating this value prop and you're identifying your users, that's when you go and you talk to those users and find out exactly why.
Well, no, I mean, so Bobby hit the nail on the head, right? So basically, once you find out, you won't know the problem. What we gave you is sort of our knowledge base that we had over time. But if you had a technical company that had RFIDs and they said, hey, we've got this great RFID technology, I'm going to use it for sponges, and they just went out with that value prop that they're going to make the hospital's life really easy because it's going to be a low cost efficient system for their just-in-time delivery system, and you didn't go into that hospital room and understand that everybody's doing the count in and the count out, that the doctors are doing something while the surgical nurse is doing something, while the scrub nurse is doing something, while the patient's lying there, you're not going to know the landscape. And because it's part of a complex system, that's where the contextual inquiry comes in, where you're actually going to the ORs and you're understanding, you're talking to those nurses, you're sort of a fly on the wall, observing how they're doing it. And you can say, how is my product going to fit into that the most least disruptive way possible? And if you can do that, that's going to add gain to the nurses because they're not going to have to add more value or more efficient. So again, it's uncovering those unmet needs that's really going to be important.
And also making sure that when you do go into those places, you're not biasing yourself to, I'm focusing on this one person. You have to explore the entirety of the environment. See, okay, is that surgeon coming in now and telling the nurse, oh, you need to count him this way? Does his point of view matter? You know, there's a lot of different aspects of it. So you need to open yourself and look at the entire environment and really get an understanding of who are the key players to this.
It's through the Jane Goodall for the Apes, right? I mean, it's basically social anthropology with a twist, that you have a product in mind that you're basically trying to observe, and the context of that environment is what you're surrounding yourself in. So where does that patient come from? Where does that all go into play? The other key thing for startups, and this is the thing that we see all the time, you know, the first call we get is, well, how much money is it going to cost? And we're like, well, and so, you know, all of a sudden we say, well, we need a product requirement spec, or we need we need something, garbage in, garbage out. How do we get to that point? So the product development or the product requirement specifications become very easy to say that, you know, I have this device, it needs to be easy to use, it needs to survive a 5-foot drop, and it needs to be put in the pocket. But how did it become that way? Where did you come up with these? How did these attributes really get into your system? And so far too often we see user requirement specs or product requirement specs, software requirement specs coming into us that are way too preliminary, well, broad and untested. So we just automatically put preliminary on top of it. We say, okay, we're going to start there. Now we're going to test that theory out. We're going to go and understand really how does that work. And this is the other part, that a big failing part that Bobby mentioned earlier, and that's that regulatory pathway. You cannot start a product engineering strategy without understanding your marketing, your technical, and regulatory pathway. And Bobby alluded to it. Is are you class A? I mean, class 2? Are you class 3? Are you a combination product? Are you even a class? Can you get around it? Are you de novo? This is where you really need to get a good qualified regulatory consultant to basically help you put it into place. Then with an engineering company or a product development company, we can work with the regulatory people to understand the best path for you based on where you want to be, what your funding tranche is at that point, and where do we want to get to. So you should not develop a product without first talking to these people and again, your potential customers. So those are the things that we put a check and balance sheet in place, and if you don't have it, we kind of challenge you, and we challenge you, and we challenge you, and we try to make sure that we reach that unmet need. And that's where in our methodology we call it the value plus one. And so not many people knew about medical products, so I guess the question is, how many people know what the FDA waterfall is? All right, a couple. So the FDA is really good at process, and they're very, very linear in their thoughts, and they've created basically this waterfall that shows you where they're expecting your process and what they're expecting you to do, and it's really about verification and validation. So user needs are first on the list. They've even identified this, and they've actually come back and really supported the user need development on products because they believe, and it's really good strategy, that if you need a really good product that's easy to use, less risk, more safety, more compliance, everything works out. So they really believe in that you have to understand the user needs. Once you get into design inputs and you go through the whole design process and go through the whole sort of inner loop, if you see the inputs through the outputs through the verification, you kind of go through those cycles, and we call those alpha prototypes. And those alpha prototypes are looks like, feels like products that you can test with, whether it's cadaver studies, animal studies, or just studies, right? I mean, it would be user studies. And we call those formative studies. So formative studies is basically you're forming your understanding that you're meeting your user needs with those products. So you'll take that product out and you'll test it with users to say, oh, this is great, this is bad, I like this, I like that, this is too small. You keep going back and forth. Eventually you get to the medical device out where it's a beta product ready for manufacturing, and you do either pre-summative or you do a validation with a summative test. And this is what the FDA requires. There's a minimum quantity of 15 users in a user group. So if you have nurses, doctors, you're going to have to go through each section of that. And that's a costly exercise. A, the FDA wants it, requires it. B, if you get it wrong, you have to do it over again. And it is costly, and most people cringe at why they have to do this because they just think it should. Right? Why do I have to go through this? So it's a challenge. So what we believe is that, again, it's an important tool, but it's linear. It's not agile. It works really good on simple problems. And again, the FDA only cares about safety and usability, not market success, right? So you're doing all this market research, but you're really not doing market research. You're basically trying to fit the round peg into the round hole for the FDA. So what we've done with the Value Plus One is we've integrated what we call, we integrated the Lean Startup, which
we've heard not a lot of people knew about this. So it's the idea of build, measure, learn. First you need to have a plan, but then you quickly just build MVPs, measure it in front of users, get the feedback, and then from there you learn to either pivot or persevere. So your idea is either true or your hypothesis is false and now you need to change something about it. And this process just makes things a lot faster because you're just taking a segment of the product development cycle and just going as quickly as possible.
This is another good book for you, Eric Ries, Startup Methodology.
You have the end.
In that, it's another tool just to alleviate the God complex. It's really just, and it's agile. So it works well with software, it works with product development. It's just a quick ideation generation, baseline, test it, modified.
Yeah.
And so if you're lucky, you can go through a couple rounds and it's built into the schedule as far as concept ideation, refinement, and all the big words that probably know to do.
So it's how do we combine those two ideas from the FDA and Lean?
Yeah, so we actually really developed this methodology that takes that agile part, puts it in the FDA, capture all that information before you go into design history or design lockdown. All of this will be in your design history files, which again, if you're working on a medical product, make sure whoever you're working with has a really good design history file system and to basically create a good documentation trail, because the FDA is going to require it when you go into submission. But again, capturing all this early, that build, measure, learn, before you go into lockdown. And I can give you another example of a company that wanted to rush the process a little bit, and when the product was still a concept, they went into design history or design input control. And now every time you change the bolt on that system, that bolt had to be changed, the drawings had to change. The cost skyrocketed from just the documentation control alone of that product. If you had done it earlier and sort of outside of that boundary, you would have been much better off. And another way to look at it, by the value plus one, go to the next slide, is really kind of, we look at it another way. And if you take the technology, which is you, the supplier, and you look at demand being the user, and kind of look at it on a more linear scale, what are the things that line up? And so first you have a product spec, then you have to do the research protocol to test that product spec. Then you do the technology immersion, you're going to have to do the contextual inquiry to understand that you're balancing that out. And at that certain point when you're doing the system architecture concepts, the very crude forms, you also want to go into these very quick formative studies, test it with nurses or doctors or caregivers or patients. And again, if can you send a kit home to different people? Can you do, for startups, there's a great way to do this. It's called cafeteria studies. And it's basically friends and families. You get a product around and you have sort of a fairly strict protocol, but it can change. And you ask people to go through it and you try it. And you've taken that logbook and you've seen what people are doing, you're observing, and you can see their pains. If they can't open the bottle, if they're fiddling with it, something's wrong there. So you go back and you change it again. Very cheap, very affordable. You don't have to have market researchers go out and do it. When you get near to the end, well, we're not really going to talk about probably as much as the summative testing. There you need to have a simulated lab or a real use case where you need to have 15 people that are using that product actually in that simulated space. So that gets really expensive, very timely. You need 3 people to observe, take notes, protocols can't change. So the more you can do informative, the better off you are, and the quicker summatives are going to be. So,
money, timeline, and costs. So we talked about this a little bit. Typically, and this will depend on where you are in the process, what kind of classification you have for medical device with the FDA, depends on a lot of things. But typically, the development is about 2 years. And that includes doing the research and definition, doing all the concept developments. All of these things is all the way up to starting pilot production. And then, after you have that development, there's still things to think about. Once you have manufacturing, do you have to do clinical trials with your beta prototypes? Do you have to have your FDA submission? All these things change, and really it's a take it a little piece at a time. So instead of thinking of it as this huge chunk, it's how can we create different sections, understand different phases, and get the value out of those phases so that there is a good stopping point and a good understanding before moving on to the next phase.
So I mean, before we go on, so 2 years, fairly long development cycle. That's what you have to be prepared for if you're going into medical startup. Yeah, can you get it down to 6 months if it's a simple problem and you have a predicate device? And sure.
And if it's not a platform.
Yeah. Will it take longer than 2 years if it's a combination product, or if there are other, if you're involving a drug formulation in this product? Absolutely. So how do you get through that stage in that 2 years? You don't know what you don't know, and that's the really big challenge that we see with startups, is that you're going to find these hiccups that come in there, and we'll probably get to that a little bit later as far as that relationship, but it's important to really embrace the fact that whoever you're with, you're going to be with for a while. Which gets to the process map, right?
Yes.
So we've developed a process map that's part of our process. Well, it's not process. But in it, it's a 5-stage process. And what's really important here is to understand all the parts that go into it. And there are a lot of parts that you can do yourself to save money before you go to a product development company. And there are a lot of things that you may want to do but you shouldn't do, and you should give to people that are more professional or qualified to do. So for example, user needs, we talked to that for a fair amount. There's the voice of customer, market research, user assessments. But then there's that technology, or understanding that technology, and if you're lucky, it's fairly straightforward. A lot of projects that we get come from labs that they've been working on cancer formulation for multiple years, and it's the size of this room as far as a system, and they want it to be a benchtop or a point-of-care device. So that's going to be a bigger challenge as far as understanding the commercialization pathways. Project planning, you get your regulatory, which we talked about, cost of goods. Do you have a recurring revenue? What is the strategy that you're really looking at as far as, if you're talking to an investor, they probably want to know that you're making some money along the way and you're not giving it away. And again, risk. We didn't talk about risk a lot. You're going to talk a lot about risk when you go into the product. There's user risks, use FMEAs, there are FMEAs for just understanding the business segment you're in. And there's verification and validation plans. Creating that whole pathway that you put in place is a big part of before you can start going into the definition. Once you go in there, this is kind of the fun stuff, and everybody kind of gets happy, and it's a friendly time, right? Concepts are coming out, and everything's working well, and you're talking to users, and you're getting understanding of who the users are, and all of a sudden you come to some concept ideations. This is where that road, that pathway we talked about earlier, concept A, concept B, concept C, disposable, reoccurring revenues, semi-disposable. Are you using RFID, are you using Bluetooth, are you using cell chip? We're great at making concepts, we're great at putting out ideas. Locking those down to make them viable is where the real system architecture comes in, and you need to test that to your user requirements that you're developing concurrently. If you get that wrong, everything after that is a failure. And it's true. And because right here, this is where all the work comes in, development. That's taking the industrial design, the user interface design, getting it all the way to an alpha build that is a looks like, feels like prototype is really what this work of effort is. And this is probably the lion's share of time in that whole 2-year development where you're working through. And again, you're working on your design outputs, you're a lot of paperwork, a lot of work that doesn't go into the product. Pre-production is where the betas, the outcome come into, and this is where you start wanting to talk about, are you building $100,000 instruments, or are you building $100,001 instruments, and what's your manufacturing pathway, and what's the product made out of it, and is it recyclable, does it have obsolescence in it that's going to be a problem, and all these good things. Yeah, go ahead.
You just reminded me of a point if I may interject. A gentleman told me about a $1 million endoscope that took the most amazing pictures, but obviously no payment code for it, so thought that would exemplify your point there.
Oh, thank you very much, and that's a great point. Payment code happens all the way back in here, and there are a lot of startups that come to us that, again, there's people that come right out of the lab and they have this great idea for a new
endoscope.
Well, yeah, endoscope, and all of a sudden, well, who's actually prescribing it? Who's actually getting the results of it? Is it needed? Right, that's a big question. What are you getting out of it? Is it super resolution that nobody needs? All these things happen, and it all happens back here. So that billing code is what the investors want here. And then if you're designing a new test strip for a diabetic instrument, good luck, right? I mean, there's not a lot of billing for that. So that's a great point. Thank you. And then all the way down into the product realization. This is where the transfer of manufacturing comes in. This is where the product design firm should have a good sense of understanding where you belong and help you guide you there, and that's where you want to probably start working with your regulatory people and understanding what kind of tests you want to go through for your summative. But at the end of this point, when you're ready to go to a market launch, is where a lot of things can happen. You need to find a manufacturer that's GMP, that has ISO 1345 that will take. Are they going to be basically handling all your orders and handling all your returns? So again, startups are an amazing group of people. They're, on one hand, people that will just say, hey, we're going to build it and we're going to put it on the internet, and that's all we need. And we look at each other going, I wish we had that idea. But there are other people that are going to go all the way through and say, well, I have to have this value chain where now the questions come out, do I license it? And Bobby's going to address a lot of those kind of points when we start talking about building a business pitch deck. But all these things have come into this whole scenario of that 2-year relationship. And again, this is that take home. It is just like a marriage. When you start, when we get our first startup and we think it's an amazing idea, we're like, we need these guys. This is cool. This is really neat. And then we try to, we put our peacock feathers out, dance around, and they come to us and say, this is a great idea. And we just break courtship, win the project. They're excited. We're excited. The honeymoon starts. And if you don't have that built-in trust, communication, and collaboration, in that 2 years, something's going to happen. You're going to have a baby. Something's going to happen, and with those growing pains, if you don't have that good relationship and be coming with everybody, and so if we were unrealistic and told you it would take 1 year to market and would only cost this much, and now that year's up, we're in a bad place. And likewise, if somebody said, well, we have this technology, and when we see it, it's nowhere near realization, they're in a bad place. So again, it's just that understanding. And so this baseline is just kind of a concept of a project plan that is a generic plan, but it just shows you that throughout there you have certain milestones. And that's kind of where our Jacob ladder is, if you will. And we build it to the client, to the customer. They're all different, they're free. So it's basically a good opportunity for you if you want. Your investor's going to want to know how much money it's going to cost. Product development firms will offer that for you. Don't abuse us. Absolutely share your ideas, and we'll bring through what we believe the value cost would be, and then you kind of go from there. Any questions on that?
And like Tor was saying, it's like a marriage. The key is really good communication. So it's keeping the lines open, collaboration with the different teams, even internally, understanding that one team is working on one aspect, but they need to make sure that the other team, like the industrial designers, know that the engineers need to work on this, and then software needs to get their hands into it. And all of these players need to all be aligned to understand the vision and talk through it.
This is sidetracking a little bit, but it happens, so might as well say it. So a lot of people will say, well, it's that much. Well, what if you want to be a partner? So what if we take some equity in this? And our position, we've done it, we've tried it, we're still working. So the challenge is that if a VC or an individual investor that's trained in knowing what a value is won't give you money, the chances are that us taking that money responsibility is not going to be a good profit strategy for us. So yeah, we're interested in but the honest truth is, if you can convince an investor, you might as well get the money from the investor. Go that way. Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning that 75% of medical startups fail. It seems like you're giving a lot of good advice in general about how startups should operate. What do you think is the main difference between a medical startup and a non-medical startup that would cause the difference in success rate?
Sure, great question. So the question was, what's the difference between a medical startup and a regular startup? Okay?
Sure.
So, everything. Everything. You can create a cat toy with Android software and get it to market in 3 months. You can probably do it in 2 months. It may fail, it may succeed, but you don't have to get through the FDA. It's that ugly FDA elephant in the room that is going to stop that whole change. So the FDA wants paper trail. They want to understand that you met all these value props. So the main difference is failure rate in regular companies is probably the same. It's just a lot easier to fail and a lot less money.
And the landscape is different too. So if you're looking at consumer product, you know pretty much who your end users are. They could be pretty much anyone, and you have a target market, and you have a target age group and users. For medical devices, sometimes that landscape's all over the place. We talked about briefly an endoscope. Now does insurance cover it? Well, that's a big part of it. Does the user want it? How are they, going to go about it? So there's a lot more risks involved. The rewards are much higher, but in terms of just development time and understanding who your key players are, and even in our example, we had the for the RFID tags, we had multiple different users that we have to think about every step of the way. We have to think about the patient, we have to think about the nurse, we have to think about the hospitals wanting to buy it. So that's another level on top of things.
We've actually had clients that have posed that question, and they ended up going to the veterinarian market first just to get a recurring revenue stream before they could actually go through and vet the whole product through the FDA. So there's huge hurdles you have to go through medical product development that are not there for consumer products. I mean, again, it's all market. Nobody cares if you fail. If your cat chokes and dies on it, that's not good.
That's a PR problem.
It's a PR problem. That's not, you know. So, you've done everything right, Bobby. What do you do?
So, a lot of things we hear is, now I'm ready to go to investors, and I'm ready to pitch. I've went through this process, I've learned all the good things, I'm ready to go to get money. Well, we usually say, stop, slow down. Before you even get to the investors, is that really your best avenue? There are a lot of grants out there, there's a lot of different areas that you could go with, with SBIR grants, STTRs, and if you're not familiar with that and you're a startup, you should look into it.
No, yeah, it's basically free money that the taxpayers are giving you to solve a problem. We haven't talked about it today, but open innovation and the whole idea that, if there's a need, like the opioid crisis, right? I forget how much money the government just threw into the grants for solving that particular problem. So if you have a new idea for that, which we've heard a few, we would, you want to say, well, I want to get a grant. You can get up to, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars worth of grants. The challenge with grants is it takes time and you have to prove your case. That's what earlier I said, that the NIH actually makes you take this lean startup course once you get the grant, because they've seen so many people that get the funding fail because they're not doing the right thing. But they're actually very good at making sure that they're giving the money to the right causes. So the more scientific you are, the more mainstream that you're trying to solve. If you have a product that you think can help developing nations or countries or pediatrics, something that's underfunded for the most part from a mainstream manufacturing for medical firms, they'd be interested in doing that, and then you can take that and pivot it to the more mainstream or do it.
Right, and with any product, this isn't just for medical, but when investors want to give out money, really it's, did you put your own money into it? If you're not going to put your money into it, why would I invest in you? So it's, understanding that there are certain, you can't get $1 million right away. There's a process, but there are avenues available for funding.
And I think even if you go that route a little bit further, when you look at the investors, you're also you're giving away your equity. And just like Shark Tank or any of these other investment shows you'll see, if you can do it on your own, you're better off. The last thing you want to do is just go through financing after financing after financing, because the people, the VCs aren't going to want to find out that all your friends and family have scattered through 55% or 65%, and now it's not just you they're talking to, but 20 people. So they want to have a leader, they want to have a strong vision, and so keeping your equity is important. You talk licensing.
No, you can talk licensing.
So licensing is a thing we threw in there because partnering and licensing are key things, and we talked about that a lot of startups think that they're just going to sell that product. If you don't have a brick and mortar shop, it's pretty hard to sell, especially in the medical field. But if you develop a really novel idea, and Johnson & Johnson has J Labs, right, which is it's basically trying to invest in up-and-coming pharmaceutical companies, and that's another mechanism where you can actually develop a product to a certain way, certain form, certain sort of pathway. The further up that value chain you develop it, the more real you make it, the more money you're going to get for a licensing or a buy. If a Pfizer or a Merck wants to buy you, the more real you make it, the more money you get. So that gets into pretending a little bit that you're going to be a product company, even though you're fully intended to license it. These are things we need to know. That's what a product development company needs to know, because you'll show kind of some virtual renderings and some other things that kind of show that.
So we're going to dive into this a little bit. So what makes a pitch deck good? So this isn't just for medical devices, but overall, what does make a good pitch deck? And really, it's having a convincing story. So whenever you're pitching to investors, to anyone, you want to have a story. And what we've found is that a lot of times inventors have a tendency to just explain their technology, that it's so cool, it's so great, it's the best thing since sliced bread. But then they don't understand their audience is there to invest in their company, not in their idea. And if you can't explain what kind of need you're fulfilling, then everything just goes downhill.
You have to have a good elevator speech.
Right. Good elevator pitch and really trying to make sure that everything flows together, not just from a product side, but also the business side and your team and where you're thinking you're going to go into the future. That brings us to just some basics. So we've kind of put these together, basic slides that should be included inside of a pitch deck. So you have different categories there. First, obviously, your intro, and then talking about what the problem is, what the solution is, and what is your product. That's another thing that I can't tell you how many times I've heard it. People will talk about their patent and their technology, but they'll never get down to what is their product. What is it that they're trying to sell? You know, they're talking about a molecule that connects with another molecule, and that's amazing. It's a breakthrough, but is that actually a product?
So Bobby, I'm going to ask the audience, does everybody know what a pitch deck is? Yes. All right. Okay. But, so you notice these blocks that Bobby has is about 14, right? So each one represents a slide in that pitch deck. More often than not, you get really ambitious and you want to load the deck to make it 20, 30 pitch deck. The smaller you can make it with proving your point, the better.
All right, and it goes again, this is just a basic, and it will depend on what your technology is and what your business is, but some of these things are just, and you'll notice a big portion of that is business. And that's something we see that people kind of gloss over, is how are you taking your idea and making money out of it? And one of the key slides that we have in there is right in the middle of product and business, and that's the users. And we've touched on this a lot, but that's really your bridge from your product and understanding that it's met the need into your business aspect of what is your market, how large is your market, and how can you create a value and create money.
Take that business model canvas and identify every need that the business model canvas has and put it into your pitch deck, and there you go.
Right, and you might add slides, delete some of these slides, but you know, at a core, you should at least evaluate everything that's in that.
What about the team?
The team is right there. It's at the end. So having a good team, good point. Having a good team is very important. A lot of investors or a lot of inventors believe that they are the company and they think that they can do everything. So that means they'll take care of the money, they'll take care of the product, they'll take care of the regulatory, they'll take care of something we haven't really talked about much, but the attorneys and understanding, you know, all the legal aspects, which is a big portion of this, and they'll just Google it, find the first answer, write it down, and then at the end they find out, oh, I made a mistake. I didn't hire somebody to do this for me. I didn't have my team in place. Now I have to backtrack, and that's where a lot of problems happen.
I think this is also important to note that we're talking startups, so a lot of people are thinking one or two people or a small company. This could be a Fortune 100 startup. This could be a new product that they're developing in their skunkworks or just a new thing, something that came out of R&D. Everybody should be following this process. This isn't just alone just to a startup.
Right, and the team doesn't have to. Right, and the team doesn't have to be one specific person. So if we're there to help with product development, we'd be part of that team. So other entities could also be part of the team.
The other part that you probably need to be aware of is if you get that funding that you're so desperately looking for, you may be voted off the island. I mean, so there's a high risk that if some companies coming or VCs coming in with a Series B funding tranche, there's going to be a new CEO. And CEOs change as companies grow. There's some CEOs that are really good at raising funding or just conceptualizing, and there's some that are really good at implementing, and some are really good at maintaining the business. So be careful that you don't fall in love with that company, that it's your baby. You have to kind of let it go if you're looking for that funding. And we see that quite a bit.
Yeah. How many of you have submitted a pitch to an investor before? Okay. did you submit it directly to the investor, or did you submit it through a website that had a portal for? So what we've seen a lot of times is the company will send it to, let's say, an angel investor. It goes through a process, and that process starts with interns. So they'll be getting hundreds and hundreds of pitch decks in a week, and the interns will look through it, take a quick pass, and then decide the fate of your company and decide which one to move on to the next part. Because the investors and the actual pitch takes place weeks or months after that. So just to drive home the point that you need to have a convincing story and have everything flow together, those interns are going to be looking at this quickly. So you want them to understand what is it that you're doing, why is it good, and what is the value add to the investors. And some of that comes in also through services we do, like product renderings.
Can I give a little background on this?
Sure.
So this is an interesting case. This, again, we didn't think about this until now, but to talk about it. But it's really, we, HS Design, we actually developed our own company, or our own product. So this is the challenge, right? Are you a product or a company? But we basically submitted an idea for an IPI grant. It was sort of a challenge, and with the designers, we said we have some good ideas. We want to go for this challenge. It's for delivering multi-particulates, which is a new type of formulation that's tasteless, doesn't need water, and a lot of other qualities. But they're basically nanoball bearings, and there's no clear way to measure them. But the IPI, or the Innovation Institute for Pediatrics, put out this grant for Pfizer to basically say we need a better way to get this delivery system to developing nations for kids and for pediatrics. And by the way, if we can get a consortium of pharmaceutical companies around it, that'd be great, because there's really no big payment scale for pediatric pharmaceuticals that they can leverage. So long story short, we won that. We actually used that money to submit SBIR grant. We won that grant, and now we're partnered. We licensed that actual product because we didn't have a company that's going to actually provide this. We actually partnered with Rochling, who's here today as well, to actually manufacture it and sell it. So together, we're working together, and sort of basically that story that Bobby just laid out. We chose the licensing route. We went through SBIR, so we didn't lose any equity throughout that whole development. That helped fund the development of the risk and the validations and the clinical trial, as well as the tooling and things like that. So it's a great mechanism to use grants or open innovation and other places to work for. But again, don't keep, if we got greedy, or if we decided to say, hey, we know what we're doing and we're going to become a product company. One product doesn't make a company, and so we'd have to have a platform, we'd have to manufacture, we'd have fulfillment, we'd actually have to do the processing of deciding what drugs go in it and verifying it. We didn't want any of that. We just wanted to say we had a good idea to move on.
Right.
So you were
and then,
talking about that.
Yes, so when Tor mentioned multi-particulates and pediatric care, did any of you think it would look like this? So that's basically what the idea behind product renderings are. In the beginning, when we start doing the designs, it's really about showing what the end product could look like to the user, to the investors. And so we created these before we actually made them to help show exactly how they were going to be used, their environment, so their users right now, they're children, so how is it going to be used in front of children, and then just a little bit of the details of what is involved in that device. The
Basically
valve
creating a spec sheet before we actually built any steel to build any prototypes tool.
Yeah.
And so we validated that the product met the needs, so we were able to get further funding to get to the tool.
And you could get a better story out of it, because now you know exactly what it's going to end up looking like.
So one service that product development companies do, we do it, is if you had an idea and you need to basically get that pitch deck created, or you need to get some of the meat put into it, we have different pathways that we can work with you. That's way before design lockdown, and it's sort of, it's creative thought to basically take your idea to visualization to get that further excitement to the next step, to that next shape of lab.
And then one thing to keep in mind when you're pitching also is that it's not about selling a product. It's really about selling your business as an opportunity for an investor to grow with your company. So keep that in mind. At the end of the day, you're not going to be selling 2 or 3 syringes, but you're going to be selling your company.
Well, it works the other way around too. Is you want to make sure that you're with the right company for your product. So don't take the first tranche that comes to you, but be selective about that. That investor is going to be the same as we would be with you as far as that wedding or that marriage and that long-term relationship. They're going to be your next relationship moving on for eternity.
Yeah, depends on the deals. And Tord touched on this a little bit. Product is not a business. So one product sometimes could be expanded into other things, and that's something that we always try to talk with our startups about. Is what is your end goal? So are you looking for recurring revenue on your product? Do you need a disposable aspect so you can get that revenue? Or are you looking to just create a few of these machines? What is the end goal so that we can help drive your business?
That's a good point, especially if you have a new technology that's not been done before. Let's say you're replacing a pill with an electroceutical, right? How do you get that recurring revenue? How do you basically tell that user that the device that you just sold them for $30 is going to last forever, but you're going to charge them the same amount of an Advil costs for a $30 pill pack? And how do you get that strategy, that message around to them that they can embrace it and actually see a value add? Everything gets back to the value proposition, the codes, the building, and we didn't even touch on ancillary places like pharmacies. Is it open? How are they involved? If you're dealing with drugs, it definitely will be.
Right, and our goal is to make sure that the startup is successful. I mean, we don't get anything out of it if the startup is not successful as well. So it's how can we help you be more successful with your business?
We'll leave you with this. It's a classic Yogi Berra quote. When you come to a fork, take it. Basically, the notion here is, again, there's a lot of different pathways that you're going to have along your development journey. Know that you have a strategy. Know that you're going to when you go down that one fork, that it's for the right reasons, and that going back and swimming upstream to go down the other, it's going to be a painful process, and you're going to have a lot of people asking you, how did we get here? So earlier questions early on, making sure that you verify and validate your user needs early, often, is going to give you one more chance to success.
Didn't have a chance to read these books. These are really great tools to help understand the business and move forward and kind of...
These actually came out of the syllabus for I-Corps, which is the body that the NIH uses for when you do get a grant. It basically take you to a quick learn school of how to be a startup and the right way. And these are the 3 books that can make you read right from the first week. Yeah, the value plus one, again, the FDA is your friend. If you think about it, their goal is to meet patients' needs, and if you can do that and do it painlessly and give them a gain, you win and you're successful. And you can improve the market research and the FDA in the same process, and if you do that, you increase your chances of success.
One last point before we get to the end. One other is with the FDA. What they really care about is risks and the user needs. So at the end of the day, they're not looking to see if your business is going to be successful and make millions of dollars. What they care about is the end users and the amount of risks that you've been able to mitigate with your device. So just...
And they seem really mean, right? And they want to stop everything. They actually don't. And they welcome you to come early with your idea and actually have meetings with them to discuss what regulatory pathway you should have. Better that you're more prepared, but sometimes you want to be less prepared and just say, this is where I believe I'm going to be, and have them kind of say, well, you should look at this, come back, work with them. They're much more friendly than, So again, thank you again for your time. Thank you. Any questions?
So, as a startup, what are some of the ways that you could generate user needs? Let's say if you're developing a surgical product, it's not that you could walk into a hospital and say, hey, I want to look at your surgical room. because I'm thinking of developing a product. So as a startup, what are some of the, off-the-beat resources that you can use to generate user needs?
Well, so I think the most successful startups that we've seen are people that have actually had a problem happen to them. They found a solution that worked, and they were open to test it and pivot along the way to make it more widespread. But you bring a great question, and I think the question, if I rephrase it, was on the startup, how do I basically get into the hospital to verify that I'm on the right track? And it's not easy, especially now. All of our staff that goes into hospitals are vetted through a management system to make sure that we've got the right ethics, we've got the right shots, we've got the right training. So it's a very laborious process to get in, and it's gotten a lot harder. 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, you could probably talk to a doctor and find yourself in an open heart surgical suite if that doctor actually had the idea and wanted you to see it. Now there's no way you're going to be able to do that. It's probably 10 years for that, but you understand that point. So it is challenging. So if you have friends that are nurses, friends that are doctors, friends that have these ideas or have these places that they can be, work with them. But there are a lot of doctors that sort of go down that pathway because they have that experience. If they find a problem that they like, don't like it, and it's interesting. Doctors have become a lot more entrepreneurial the last 5 years than they used to be. It used to be that they were trained not to break regulation or not to change anything, and the process was the process. Now we see a lot more doctors that have MBAs that have, their goal to be a doctor is to create an invention and become a product company. So that mindset's changing.
And there are firms out there, like the one that's up there, that help provide that kind of help to get into those hospitals and to see and to talk to users, do the contextual inquiries and things of that nature.
Yeah.
No.
I was like,
no. Thank you.
Yeah. No. So yeah, we do. We actually we do have recruiting services that we can help recruit. But again, you're dealing with honorariums. You're dealing with people that have not a lot of time. So, for the question is, how did you come up with that need? Was it just a vision, or was it a real practical experience, or somewhere along the line, your story probably has an idea of how you got there, where you have some vehicles to go forward, but you absolutely do need to have that accessibility.
Question at the front.
I have a question for the group, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'm really intrigued by this. I have I've worked with firms like yours, where what I do is I specialize in marketing, and I find that marketing firms like yours to be really, really hard. And I want to check an assumption with you, because I think you guys are potential customers of his. The assumption is that for you to hire someone like HS Design, there's at some point in the company where you say, we don't know how to do this by ourselves. And if it's a bigger company with an engineering department, is that an admission of failure somehow? Do you have to go to your boss and say, we don't have the skills and we need to bring in a consultant? I'm asking because as a marketer, I believe that the way that you win business is when you say smart things in front of a room and they say, I got to ask him the next time I have a question. That's good. Or a personal connection. But other than that, how would you go about picking up the phone and trying to figure out who could help you design something? Really, anyone who's willing to raise their hand and offer a suggestion. Yes, Larry?
One of the things here is our parent company has said, how do we get to fastest? I'm sorry, how do we get to the end zone faster? And we can add on resources, recruit engineers, but you lose time. And so a lot of it is forums like this to hear what we would consider thought leaders in this area and start making those connections. But it's not at all a question of shame. It's like, how do we get there faster? And it's not always internal.
Because one option for you, I imagine, I don't know the size of your company, could be hire more engineers and do it in-house.
That takes time.
Because of all the training and the like. Yes. Jose.
As a certification laboratory, what I usually do when I meet people that are startup, I would guide them on what would be the form that the certification will take place. And also we have consultants that can help them to start debriefing the design step that they have to go through. Because you're right, many times startup are lost in their, they have something in the mind, but they don't know how to put it out or how to explain it even.
Okay,
So
that makes
they
sense
need
for
people
really-
to help them out, to guide them at the beginning.
Arlen, way in the back, nice and loud.
So my experience with that is it's decisions made before we start the project. So even though we have a large internal engineering team or something like that, that it's a decision at the beginning, we are going to outsource this to a design firm rather than build it internally because we have other projects that we're busy with, we don't have the time to hire more staff, whatever. We want this to get done, and it's generally the sorts of things that don't require the secret sauce of the company, right, to do that. And so
Let me build on that. Let me ask. Has anyone ever been in a situation where they're building something and then they realize we don't have what we need to get this done, we better hire someone outside? Raise your hand if you have.
Well, yeah, all the time. I mean, we partner with specialists if we don't have to.
But is it that you think you're going to get it done all in-house, but then you realize you...
No, we specialize in a certain area and we realize that that's our core strength. And if we don't, we want to go upfront with our potential clients and say, if we have expertise that we need that we don't have in-house, we're going to partner with people that we think of.
So I'm hearing an abundance of, when we go into a relationship like one with HS Design, we start realizing that we need someone like them and we reach out to them up front. It's not ever a, oh no, we're in this situation, we better get more resources, because that's one of the things I've been trying to figure out on behalf of clients. Ed?
I think you have two situations. One is startups where they get to that point where it's like, oh shit, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And the other is, like most of these other fellas here, where it's a big company and they know from the beginning that they don't have the resources, or, you know, they want to put their A-team on the stuff that they know how to do, and there's a new product that's coming up, so they just don't have the resources. So from the beginning, they want to go and get a team that knows how to do this new thing. Yeah, they just don't have the resources.
Okay, Dennis?
Yeah, and almost echoing what he just said, because a lot of companies now, they don't take this personal. It's not like we're a failure, especially in this day and age where things are happening so quickly. And products, especially in medical device manufacturing or medical devices, you need a wide range of talent. And to bring all that in for a product that may or may not succeed at the end of the day, you've just increased your overhead quite a bit, taking a lot of time, internal expenses, where a company like this, they have everything you need. You may not outsource the entire project to them, but you may outsource a significant amount or some amount that makes sense for your internal resources to balance that.
How many in the room have been an influencer or a decision maker about who to hire in terms of an agency? May I ask, how did you go about making that choice? Was it someone that you knew from a company you used to work with? Was it a presentation that you saw? Was it something that you read? How did you decide that's the one? Did you have an RFP? Anyone?
Usually it's somebody you know.
Yeah. Someone you know, someone you know, someone you know.
White papers.
What's that?
White papers.
White papers.
Yeah.
Interesting, okay. Anyone else? Arlen?
So we're generally looking for a specific skill set, and so we find experts in that field, like optical design, for instance, or something like that.
So would you Google that?
Most of the time it comes from research articles and things like that, companies that are doing white papers.
Okay. Christine?
I've always felt a two-step process. First is who do you know in your network. The second piece is how do you know they can do it? How do you vet them? You can assess their capabilities. So I've always felt that it's really critical to kind of have a checklist of people, all the skills that you need, and then assess their answers to that.
Okay. Anyone else had something on this side? Yes? What's your name?
Piyush.
Hi, Piyush.
Competitive products. If you see that one of your competitors has a similar product designed by XYZ company, or they have similar engineering skills that you require in your product, you can reach out to them.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that's a great question, and we do see companies, larger ones, come to us for specific skill sets. So, for example, if they're doing one product a year, or maybe one product every 4 years, right? Or you know, there's a new R&D program coming out. To hire a team around that, to their point, as far as I need to get an industrial designer, a UIX person, a human factors person that lives and breathes that product or knows that technology, it's going to be a hard ramp up to get to, and you're basically locked in for that person for, you know, ever until you fire them or they need. Right? So there's a pushback for consultancies to. There are two reasons I see. One is to handle that overload of work or a new product that comes out that's a surge or sort of a blip that'll go away quickly that you don't want to add staff to. And the other is really to collaborate with and just to get other eyes on it to make your team bigger and better. That's where we see a lot of successful collaboration where we'll be working with the internal designers. They're called the Fortune 100 companies. Industrial designer will work with their UX person. We'll bring on 2 more people to add to his staff to help him or her bring that product forward. So it's not just black and white that we would take it or they would take it. A lot of times it's just to make that team a lot more robust.
How many of you in the room would like a copy of this presentation? My advice to you is throw your business cards at these gentlemen before you leave the room. We'll get them to you,
just
but
hand them. Don't
throwing is far more entertaining, and this show is all about fun. So whoever can flick it the furthest wins the candy bar.
How about some handout to Joe?